Welcome to Pepper Shock Media's Marketing Expedition podcast, keeping you up to date with the latest in marketing and advertising. Now here's your host, Rhea Allen.
Welcome. I'm Rhea Allen, President and CEO of Pepper Shock Media, as well as Integrative Marketing Director. And today, I'm excited we have Pete Butler with Valtrend here today. And I want to know all about what is Valtrend, how'd you get started? Tell me everything that there is to know about Valtrend.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, Ray. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Valtrend is a business appraisal firm, so I'm a business appraiser, so I value privately held companies. So unlike, say, Microsoft on the publicly traded exchanges, business owners oftentimes don't have much of a clue on what the value of their business is, and business appraisers provide that clue and information.
So what made you decide that this would be a good idea for you to start this business?
I started Valtrend in basically the heart of the economic recession. It was kind of forced upon me on some level. So started back in March of 2010 and kind of thought to myself, if not now, when? And so I've been at it almost 9 years now.
So what did you do before your business started?
Well, I was working for another firm here in town, a CPA firm, doing pretty much the same work that I'm doing now.
Branched out on your own and have been going strong since?
Yes, can't complain too much anyway, yeah.
So tell me about some examples of things that you've been able to value and in what situations or circumstances you need to be able to value businesses.
It comes up often. There's generally some trigger events that a business owner might face in his or her career that requires a business valuation. Whether or not the business owner chooses to go about it themselves or hire, a professional opinion is up to the business owner, of course. But those can be estate and gift tax planning purposes. Just to have knowledge of what arguably the largest asset in your portfolio may be, right? The privately held business. Estate and gift tax compliance work. Unfortunately, a business owner may pass away, and the IRS is interested in what the value of that business may be. Or if that business owner is interested in gifting a fractional interest to their son or daughter, for example, the IRS again is also interested in the value of that gift. More proactive valuations might be for a merger and acquisition, partner buy-in, buyout. Is it a fair price or not? Financing, lending, so work with banking institutions from time to time. Stock options, so sometimes high-tech firms who don't have the wherewithal, the cash to pay their employees might issue equity in the form of stock options, and that needs to be valued from time to time. Employee stock ownership plans, which is
ESOP, right?
An ESOP, which is a nice way to provide ownership to the workforce, and it can be a great exit strategy for the proper business and the right business owner.
I've heard both benefits and drawbacks to that idea.
Yes, it's expensive, and it requires annual work and a lot of legal work and accounting work and valuation work. So it can keep people busy for sure. Litigation support, so from time to time I'm an expert witness and defend and support the opinion of value, in front of opposing attorneys.
Is this kind of like a divorce situation where you have
divorce is one area of litigation support, in addition to maybe calculation of lost profits. Gotcha. Somebody potentially reneged on a contract or something like that, and there's alleged damages, and that has to be quantified. Divorce, certainly, it's unfortunate, but oftentimes there's businesses involved, and they need to be divided as part of a community property state here in Idaho, for example, and
What's going to happen with the Amazon split? I heard that it's going to make her like the most, wealthiest woman in the world. because of the split that's happening?
Oh
my goodness.
Well, yeah, I just saw that too. Jeff Bezos is unfortunately going through divorce, and arguably he is the richest person in the world.
Right?
So I would think that his wife should, at least financially speaking, come out of that arrangement fairly good.
I would think so. I would think so. My
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
So
Well, it's unfortunate that that's happening. But so when you are looking at valuing a company, what are some of the things that you look at? What kind of information do you need? What helps you understand what the value is of a company?
Yeah, good question. We always ask for financial statements. Obviously, oftentimes that starts with tax returns, historical tax returns, and potentially, if the company is large enough, they may have audited financial statements or reviewed financial statements. So one of those three is generally a very good starting point. And they're only as good as they allow you to kind of look into the future, because the future is what valuation is all about. We don't necessarily care about what the company did last year, only to the extent that it might help us kind of project what it might do this year and beyond.
Gotcha. So when preparing to, get yourself into a place where if you are going to be acquired or you're going to merge with somebody or, it is divorce, like what are some steps that companies should take in order to help increase the value of their company?
A couple things obviously come to mind right off the top of my head, and when I have the opportunity to speak to business owners, I encourage them or ask them at a minimum, have you made yourself obsolete? Like for example, how important are you to Pepper Shock?
Right.
You don't have to answer that right here,
yeah.
but ironically, the less important you are to Pepper Shock, the more value you have created for the company upon your exit, because the individual buyer won't be, as worried that the clients will walk when Ray walks out the door. That can be mitigated to a certain degree with, obviously, on the way out, you would probably sign a non-compete agreement. Probably provide introductions to the buyer, to your clientele. This is my buyer, and things of that nature. So obviously, it starts with the owner. Obviously, you have a good understanding what he or she may, contribute to the business, and how important are the relationships. Where does the goodwill stand? Is it with the individual business owner personally, or is it more with the company itself?
The brand itself, Pepper Shock, not necessarily Rhea Allen, but the brand itself and how it could stand alone.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Other things to look for in any business valuation that arguably might provide more value would be recurring revenue, such as is your clientele coming back on a periodic or even a regular basis. If the proposed buyer can look into the future and have more confidence about the future, then all things being equal, generally speaking, the value of that company is probably higher than it would be otherwise.
So retainer, subscription-based or residual income, those types of things that would help with the value?
Yes, very much so.
Good. And so from a marketing perspective, what kinds of things do you see maybe in the relationship to where potential buyers are looking for companies to purchase? And how can companies say, okay, you know what, we're ready, we're going to prepare ourselves to sell? What kind of things do you see that companies do in order to get themselves into that position where buyers might be attracted to the ones that are trying to sell?
Well, from a marketing perspective, that hopefully that decision and all of that encompasses was made maybe 3 to 5 years prior to
build up to that point.
To raise your hand and, okay, I'm on the market now. It's not a decision to be taken lightly, and chances are if you've prepared for that ultimate exit, the better off, obviously you will be, because there's obviously a variety of checklists that any business owner should probably check the boxes to raise their hand and say, now I'm ready to put myself on the market to get hopefully top dollar.
So some of those check boxes are, do you have a standard operating procedure in place, or what kind of things could you prepare within that 3 to 5 years?
If we've institutionalized workflow and work process, again, it all gets back to how important is that business owner, right? If everything, all the processes are just inside the business owner's head, that's not necessarily
good,
great,
huh?
right? So certainly the standard operating procedures and employee manuals are important, and transferring customer relationships and things of that nature to the second in command. First of all, the second in command might be the proposed buyer, or it might be an independent third party, but either way, that would be important to transfer, again, for visibility into the future. And what's the employee morale look like? Is there high turnover, low turnover? Have you locked up your employees with, say, non-compete agreements, right?
Sure.
Train up all your employees, and are you training your future competitors? Or
are you training,
exactly. So the easier you can make it for the buyer in their due diligence and check those boxes and to mitigate risks, eliminate risks of the future, generally speaking, the higher the value of the company.
When businesses have in this situation, do you see that it matters if they own their own building or like their own commercial real estate space, or is that where you've seen, the business owners might retain the rights to the ownership of the building, but then, the business can be sold, or how have you seen that before?
A little bit of both. Sometimes the business owner will ride off into the sunset and sell both the real estate and the business. Oftentimes, however, they just sell the business and get out of the day-to-day of running the operation, and then keep the building, which obviously is a nice stable revenue stream for them in retirement oftentimes. It potentially could mitigate one of those risks if the buyer was able to buy the building. Obviously, you've now eliminated that risk of potential lease increases down the road, or just maybe getting eliminated from the building altogether by the probably not the landlord who is keeping the business who just sold you, or keeping the building who just sold you the business, but they may sell the business to somebody else other than you, and who knows, maybe the new landlord doesn't like you for whatever reason. So I mean, it's a risk that but I don't view it necessarily as a huge risk. Oftentimes, when I value a company that has both the real estate and the business, we'll separate the two to understand just the pure operations of the business, which is what I do as a business valuator. There's also real estate appraisers out there. So sometimes I work closely with real estate appraisers to come up with a total value, which would be real estate plus business.
Oh, that makes sense, for sure. So when you start working with a company, or you think you're going to maybe engage with them, walk me through the process. What do they need to do? What do you do? How do you work with them? What kind of questions do you ask them to get them into that mindset of what needs to come out of the valuation?
Well, there's two things that come out of the valuation. One of them is, congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Business Owner, the value of your company is $1 million or whatever. The other one that's a little bit more hidden is potentially, as we go through the valuation and uncover those risks, and maybe why I put a 3.5 multiple on the earnings as opposed to a 4 multiple. Maybe they have not mitigated certain risks, kind of like what we've just been talking about. So maybe in a year or two, instead of $1 million, it could be worth $1.5 million, just throwing a number out there. So, I mean, those are the two benefits that come from any valuation, whether it's a proactive valuation or a compliance valuation, is from a financial perspective, not just the number, but how to improve the number, and how do you improve the number? Well, I may have uncovered customer concentration risks. Like, for example, does one customer, which happens sometimes in small business,
Right.
might represent, pick a figure, 30, 35% or more of,
Right.
of a particular revenue stream. What happens to the company if that customer goes away? That's a
Right.
risk. How tight are those relationships? Who has the relationships? Is there a contract in place with those with that particular client? Is there a supplier concentration risk? Things of that nature.
One supplier instead of multiples.
Yeah, potentially. And if it is just one supplier, how have you mitigated that risk? With contracts and things of that nature. So there's a lot of behind the scenes due diligence that any buyer. I try to put myself in the place of a buyer.
Right.
What would they want to know, and here's a reasonable value of what the particular business is worth.
So you talked about privately owned businesses. At what point does it make sense for a privately owned business to go public, and why would they? Why would they want to have an IPO?
That's a very good question. Many companies today go public through different ways per se with that Small Business Jobs Act and things like that. I don't necessarily recommend that route, but you have to be fairly substantial business to even remotely, in my opinion, think about going public.
Right.
Reasons to go public is to provide liquidity, right? Again, you're public now, and after certain restrictions are up after going public, you, the business owner, and or your employees now, who arguably probably have a chunk of that public offering or future public offering, have liquidity in 3 days, right? For example, if you tried to sell Pepper Shock today, chances are you're not going to have cash in your pocket in 3 days like you would if Pepper Shock, for example, was public.
Sure.
In 3 days, trade online, you'd have the cash in your pocket. So that's certainly one big benefit, in addition to access to capital, right? If you're a publicly traded company, you have access to arguably maybe cheaper capital and things of that nature, which is all good. So
Personal guarantees kind of have to, you may not have to do that as much anymore in that circumstance,
probably
right?
not. If you're a publicly traded company, you're arguably much larger now, where banking institutions might not require personal guarantees for sure. It's a great route, and obviously a great way to create wealth and spread that wealth.
Right.
Not unlike maybe an ESOP, actually, on a much smaller scale. So.
Let's talk about mergers and acquisitions. How have you seen when companies come together, what's worked and what hasn't, and why?
Yeah, oftentimes, there's two reasons maybe why they don't work off the top of my head. Number one is a culture clash. Right? And now we have two employee bases merging, and maybe the target firm wasn't used to how the acquirer firm is bringing in their thought processes and just protocol.
Right.
The other way, which is maybe much more up my alley than observing culture shock, would be, maybe they just overpaid for the company, right? Oftentimes, companies arguably may overestimate the alleged synergies of either revenue enhancement synergies or cost reduction synergies, and therefore may overpay for that target. So that's always an issue to kind of consider.
Right.
So.
I hadn't thought about that, overpaying for something, or if they overstate what they, they might think very highly of themselves or something.
It happens, and examples are flooded in the publicly traded stock world, where ultimately over time those companies may have to write down a substantial chunk of goodwill in the billions of dollars for failed mergers, unfortunately.
I see. So when it comes to thinking about the exit strategies, and you mentioned ESOP, you mentioned, so selling it to your employees, selling it to a new company. Is there any other options that could happen? Like, what are the options for exiting a company?
For the small privately held business, you've generally hit the major ones, right?
Yeah.
Sell to a third party. Arguably, you might receive the most return there, especially if it's a synergistic acquirer, somebody in the same space. So that's always attractive.
Okay.
Other forms of exit, as you mentioned, would be selling to employees, and that's a nice way to go if the business owner, isn't necessarily, he or she may have enough per se and is not looking to get absolute top dollar, because oftentimes maybe the employees aren't able to pay as much as a third-party acquirer, particularly a synergistic acquirer.
Gotcha.
And then you mentioned, the employee stock ownership plan, which is similar to selling it to employees. Those are generally the major routes that most business owners would kind of typically consider.
I see.
So
what is it that makes the company the most valuable? Is it the receivables that come in the door? Is it the employees that you have? Like, what are the things that help kind of stack that value up?
Yeah, a little bit of everything, and it varies by industry per se. I know in the high-tech space, sometimes in these acquisitions, people are just looking for employees.
True, right.
And don't necessarily care about the company per se, but if they know they have
Skilled
a good
labor,
engineering base, qualified, well-trained, they can pay top dollar for just the employee base. But, generally speaking, you mentioned receivables, to me that's revenue, and, receivables are nice, but they don't necessarily pay the bills, right? So from a valuation standpoint, certainly at the small business standpoint, I'm not talking about some of the large publicly traded companies that are coming public or have come public lately, like Uber and things of that nature, which arguably, as far as I know, are not reporting profits, but are going to be valued in the billions. Why is that? Allegedly because they foresee, and they have obviously a huge international, footprint now. That somebody, the investors see that down the road they'll be able to monetize.
Right.
Amazon, for example, early on wasn't making any money, and I'm not sure how much. And I would argue that just looking at their profits alone from an isolated standpoint probably doesn't support a $700 billion valuation, but in the future, it very well might. That's where it comes in. So it's all about, certainly at the small business level, cash flow, right? You can have a ton of revenue, but if you're not making any money or any profits, any cash flow, at the end of the day, that's what a buyer is buying. It's the cash flow. He or she is not going to be buying, ironically, your intangible assets and your customer base. They are, of course, but they're only buying those to the extent that customer base results in positive cash flow for their expectations. Otherwise, arguably, there's not a lot of value there.
Yeah. Well, I can see, the culture and those things are, like you said, they're kind of the intrinsic value that's not, you can't really make it a tangible, understanding of how much that's worth, but that can make or break a company too. I mean, if the culture clashes so much that it's not going to be a good fit and they're just not being able to work together and they can't get the flow down and, the brand is now, you're having to either rebrand or refresh or merge into a new brand. And I can see where all of that's happening all at once and, you no longer would have brand equity in the company that's coming in. And so, I could see how all of those little things can kind of add all up.
It's a ton of moving parts in any merger and acquisition, that's for sure. That over time, nobody expects you to get it right on day one, but hopefully over time it does get done well.
Yeah, good. So can you give me an example of maybe some valuations that you did that turned out really well for you that you can share?
Yeah, just recently I valued a company that was in divorce, unfortunately, and it was a professional services firm, so there's a lot of alleged goodwill. Well, there is goodwill. Now the question is, where does it rest? Does it rest with you, the owner? Does it rest with the company? And that can be an area of controversy, particularly in a divorce proceeding. I provided my opinion. There were a couple other appraisers in on the valuation, because it's high stakes world and in divorce and emotional, and the court, the judge ended up taking my opinion of value on that, which was good for the wife in this particular instance, which was who hired me. Having said that, it wouldn't have mattered who hired me, whether the husband, because we're just here, the appraiser is just here to walk that fine line down the middle, independent and objective, and what's a fair price in this division of assets in divorce. So that's most recently that comes to mind. Of course, there's some others in my past. But
Sure, no, that's great. Well, and I can attest to the character of you as being, unbiased and all those types of things. And the other thing that you get to do on the side is you get to help select high school students. What happens? You give recommendations to the Naval Academy, and
it's not. Well, I guess it is a recommendation on some level. Like, do I highly recommend, or maybe not recommend? The not recommend has been very few and far between, actually, but it's just one small piece of the pie. Obviously, they've been developing and creating their resume for the last 17, 18 years. So we spent about an hour and a half together, and so it's just one small piece of the pie that the admissions board at Annapolis will take a look at.
Right.
So.
Well, you have to be a pretty smart kid to be able to get into that college, I'm sure. So
it appears to be the case. Yeah.
So, that's good.
So.
Yeah, you get to surround yourself with some really smart kids.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
True.
Well, Pete, how do people get a hold of you? How can they invest in your services? What can they do to reach you?
Sure. So Pete Butler, name of my company is Valtrend. Have a website, valtrend.com. Also have a phone number, 208-371-7267. So those are generally the best ways to get a hold of me.
Excellent. So. All right. Well, I sure have gotten pleasure out of getting to know you more over the last few years. We belong to Gevent together, which is a executive networking group that we get together once a month, and then occasionally in between that. And so it's been fun to be a part of that event with you. And we also got to do a really fun and really emotional, moving thing this last Christmas season. We partnered together and helped a family. It was the families that were selected got to watch a movie in one theater, and then we were all in another theater, and we got to watch them on screen, and Santa asked them questions of what they wanted for Christmas. And then we went to go shopping, and we got selected the same family. So it was fun. My family and your family together going shopping for a family in need. It was wonderful, right?
That was a lot of fun. Yeah. Great experience.
Yeah, it was. So. What do we call it? Operation Christmas or something like that?
Christmas Magic.
Christmas Magic. That's it. Yeah.
That's what it was. I think,
it was. It was very magical, and we got to give some gift cards to groceries, and oh my goodness, the little boy got a tricycle and a fire truck, and then the little girl, what was that? It was a unicorn elephant?
Unicorn elephant, I think.
Oh, yeah, like a unicorn elephant. Oh my gosh, it was so cute.
Loved that.
Yeah, she was dragging it where she went. It was very good feeling. But anyway, so thank you so much for coming out to the Pepper Shock studio today. And we'll get this out there and share it with the world and let them learn all about you, Pete.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ray. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Thanks for listening to the Marketing Expedition podcast. Find more online at peppershock.com.